4 years of economic pressure, financial blockades, and technological isolation, after February 24th, 2022, the largest sanctions mechanism in modern history was launched against Russia. The European Union, the United Kingdom, the United States, and other partners of Ukraine imposed sectoral and personal restrictions against the aggressor country. The main goal is to deprive Moscow of resources to continue the war against Ukraine and to force Putin to negotiate peace. By the end of 2025, 24,000 legal entities and individuals in Russia were under sanctions. That's 3 times more than in Iran and 5 times more than in Syria and North Korea. The restrictions have affected almost every sphere of public life. 53 scientific and educational organizations, 17 universities, and 34 research institutes have been added to the blacklist. But still, the key areas of sanction pressure have been energy, technology, industry, especially the military, and the financial sector. By the way, it was the financial sector that took the hardest hit. The freezing of central bank assets, disconnection from the SWIFT system, and restrictions for investors. All of this worked quickly and effectively. This year, Russia found itself among the countries with the highest VAT rates in the world. The value-added tax increased from 20 to 22%. The share of unpaid loans in the country rose sharply, and Russia's external debt reached a 20-year high.
According to official data published by the Ministry of Finance, Russia's external debt has reached nearly 62 billion US dollars, which is the highest recorded figure in 2 decades, as Moscow was forced to take on additional loans to finance the ongoing war against Ukraine. As of the 1st of February, records show that foreign investors held Russian government debt totaling approximately $61,970 million. The majority of these assets are made up of long-term bonds. This comes from a publication by the Moscow Times.
Technological sanctions have also produced quick and effective results. The supply of microchips, aviation components, and equipment for the military industry to Russia has been banned. Russian civil aviation has especially felt the impact of these restrictions. After Airbus and Boeing left, Russia lost access to official maintenance services and original spare parts. In response, the authorities allowed parallel imports of components and extended the service life of aircraft. For Soviet-made planes, the service life was increased to 60 years. They also announced a large-scale import substitution campaign, which ended in complete failure. As a result, there have been dozens of accidents on both domestic and international flights. According to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, in just a few years, Russia could lose half of its aircraft fleet.
Completely cut off from importing new planes, essential spare parts, and technical maintenance services by sanctions, Russian airlines could lose hundreds of airliners by the year 2030. The carriers' fleets will write off 109 foreign aircraft and another 230 Soviet planes that are 40 to 60 years old. There are also plans to decommission more than 200 helicopters, most of which are Russian-made. Currently, Russian carriers have 1,135 airplanes. Of these, only 1,088 are still flying. The rest have already been dismantled for parts. If this trend continues, Russia will lose almost half of its civil aviation fleet in 5 years, from a publication on the website of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
But the most painful blow to Putin's war machine was dealt to the energy sector. Every sanctions package from the European Union included restrictions on the oil and gas industry of the aggressor country. Europe refused seaborne deliveries of Russian oil, imposed a price cap, reduced gas purchases, and also banned the import of Russian LNG under long-term contracts. In addition, hundreds of ships from Russia's shadow fleet, which transported oil in violation of restrictions, were also sanctioned. These measures have significantly reduced Moscow's revenues. However, Kyiv insists that the pressure must become even stronger and cover absolutely all sources of funding for the war.
Europeans have done a lot, but they still haven't imposed sanctions against the Russian nuclear energy sector, against Rosatom. This is really important. They haven't imposed sanctions against the relatives of Russian officials who live in the EU and the US, who study at European universities, who own property in the United States. They own a lot of real estate, and their children and relatives are everywhere. Go back to Russia. Go home. You don't respect anyone. You don't respect the rules. You don't respect democracy. You don't respect Ukraine, Europe, and so on. Go home.
In October 2025, the United States imposed sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, as well as their subsidiaries. These giants account for more than 5% of the world's oil production. At the same time, they provide up to 40% of the oil revenues in the Russian budget. According to Ukrainian intelligence, the termination of cooperation between international companies and these corporations will cost Moscow at least $50 billion a year. The U.S. restrictions have already led to the sharpest drop in Russian oil exports by sea in many years. Some of the crude oil doesn't even make it to the refineries and just drifts at sea on tankers, while Indian companies have sharply reduced their purchases due to the risk of secondary sanctions. As economists vividly put it, for the Kremlin, this is not just a slap in the face, it's a powerful blow that's hard to recover from. Here's what the reputable publication The Washington Post wrote at the time.
An important aspect of the U.S. sanctions was the element of surprise, which for the first time showed that Putin's ability to flatter Trump and delay a ceasefire is limited as long as Russia continues its attacks on Ukraine. The overall effectiveness and impact of the sanctions on Russia will largely depend on how rigorously and consistently they are enforced, as well as to what extent companies and countries importing Russian oil are concerned about becoming targets of secondary sanctions, according to a report from the Washington Post article.
The Kremlin hasn't mentioned the claim that sanctions supposedly benefit Russia in a long time. However, the very word sanctions is considered inappropriate to say out loud there, so they came up with the phrase geopolitical challenges that have a negative impact on the economy. At the same time, the total profit of Russian enterprises over the past year has dropped by almost 8.5%. In the coal industry, losses have reached hundreds of billions of rubles, and now 2/3 of the plants are operating at a loss. Because of the loss of access to Western markets, technologies, and logistics, giants like Gazprom, Russian Railways, Norilsk Nickel, Kamaz, and many others are suffering multi-billion ruble losses. And with each passing month, the situation's only getting worse.
For Putin, this has become an economic failure. Reserves are depleted, growth is zero, inflation is in the double digits, and the interest rate is 16%. He doesn't want to end this war because the political and social cost of bringing the soldiers back is too high. So the question arises, what should we do? First, we need to increase economic pressure. Sanctions, maritime services, the shadow fleet. Hit as hard as possible. Second, continue to provide Ukraine with all the necessary resources, including tomahawks. Then we'll see it through to the end, and Ukraine will win this war.
Sanctions pressure is undermining the key pillars of the Russian economy, from the financial system to energy and industry. Coordinated action between the European Union and the United States can amplify this effect and make things even more difficult for the aggressor country. With the budget bursting at the seams, industry posting record losses, and access to technology and markets still restricted, room to maneuver is shrinking rapidly. Sanctions don't produce immediate results, but they systematically drain the resources Russia needs to continue its war against Ukraine. And more often, the Kremlin is faced not with the question of further escalation, but with how to keep its own economy from total collapse.